Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for participating in this online session from the Research Metadata Schema Working Group. This is a part of the RDA Virtual Plenary program. First, I have a few logistic items to note. We are going to recording this session. If you object to that, you can text me through the chat. And we will use collaborative notes to collect the comments, suggestions, any thoughts about presentation and discussion. So please add your name to the notes and also contribute to the notes as you can. We have a few presentations. If you have a question to speakers, please type your question in the notes. So speakers can address your question either by typing or if we have time, answer verbally. And so during the session, everyone will be on mute except the speaker. So to reduce the noise that's inevitable, we are working from home now. Okay. So the link in the Zoom chat, you have that. Before I start, I also would like to thank a few people who contributed planning of this session or speaker of this session. I would read them one by one. You can see their name and affiliations here. I'm Ming Fang Wu, by the way, working for Australia Research Data Commons. I will chair today's session. Here is the agenda for the session. We will start with introduction. Then we have two presentation of user cases. We report on progress and have a bit time for discussion. Then wrap up note actions for the group. Okay, so let's get on the first agenda item, because not many people familiar with this working group. I will provide context why we started this group and what's the objective of this working group. So in last decades or so, we see many data repositories and data catalogs appear. Actually, according to RE3 data, there are over mid-2000 now, and this number is still increasing. This probably due to the response to research reproducibility, share data, and fair data principles. So it's good that we have a data registered to the repository and archive that and trying to make them discoverable. However, there are also data discovery islands between those repositories, and researchers might not know a data repository exists from their disciplines, let alone the researchers who are conducting multidisciplinary research. They want to collect data from other disciplines, so where to find those data? So as I indicated earlier, I'm working for Australia Research Data Commons. We run our national research data catalog, Research Data Australia. So our log shown about 80% of our traffic from web search engines. So researchers, they still use web search engines to search for data. So web search engines index everything from unstructured data, semi-structured data to structured data. So the metadata from our catalog are structured data in nature. The structure encode the semantic meanings that not be utilized by those general web search engines. So if the search engines can understand the semantic meanings from structured data, then they can do better job better job to provide good user search experience. So this is not so how to get search engines to understand the semantic meanings from structured data. So this is not long to research data, also to data, every other data on the web. So for those people following semantic web, there are many years debating about what standards, there are many standards appeared. Eventually, the community converging on these a collection of shared vocabulary that's called Schema.org. So there are 3 things needed to note about that. So it keeps simple things to be simple. If you just try to simply publish structured data, so you can just use one namespace, like a 20 property to describe your data, that's enough. You don't know deeper than that. For experienced developers or webmasters, you can do complex things to mix this vocabulary with other vocabularies from your displays, for example. And by using this common shared vocabulary, so we can make that the semantic meanings not only understandable by humans, but also by machines. So if machine understand to that, then can do more intelligent job to make it more understandable for humans. So since start of this vocabulary, it has been used by major site in variety of sectors, and those ones with structured data, such as news, books, finance, e-commerce, and etc. So you can see web search engines like Google, they have like a vertical search built on those structured data. In the same sense, because commercial companies sees more research data appears available from the web, they also developed the data search tools. For example, Google launched the data search in September 2018. Now it's out of beta early this year. So they can, this tool can crawl all structured data from all repositories if available, and provide one point of search to all repositories. So what we as metadata publishers need to do is to map the metadata from our existing schema to schema.org, then embedded that JSON LD with the schema.vocabulary in landing page, and create a register sitemap so the aggregator knows where to crawl those landing pages, then index that and build a search tool on top of that. So aggregator can be the web search engines from private company or anyone, you know, this information is out there on the web. So any infrastructure can be aggregated by themselves. So here is a page indexed by Google data search. This is like any other metadata landing page. But if you look at the source code of that page, you can see there is this snippet with schema.org vocabulary encoded what this data about, okay, and their properties. So we call this snippet structured data or markup. So this vocabulary, schema.org, have a set of types, and each type of properties they arrange in hierarchical order. And the vocabulary itself is managed through engagement with the community of practice, and their moderated discussion on W3C lists. So vocabulary is community owned and developed. And the dataset type is actually built on top of the W3C DCAT data catalog vocabulary. This type, dataset type, has 91 properties. The properties shown on this screen, about 20 of them are those recommended by Google dataset search. So as I indicated earlier, so not just the commercial companies, research data infrastructures can also take benefit from this concept of vocabulary that's accessible via web architecture. The advantages include, but not exclusively. So with this vocabulary, it can enhance interoperability across data catalogs. And potentially we could have a new method, the crawl for metadata or content syndication aside along with OLI PMH, that's a popular syndicating method currently. And so because everyone publishes this structured data, that could enable the fabulated search across repositories of specific domain or several domains, and depends on a research need. And we can build rich search APIs on top of this structured data, from text search, JSON API to Spark queries. So as a quick proof of concept, last year we did this prototyping, and so those repositories on the left, they already published their structured data. I think these repositories are those they participate in the EarthCube P418 project, and Doug and Adam possibly they lead that project. So we took sitemap from these data repositories, and also the one from data catalog from Korea Research Institute. We crawl and index them, crawl the structured data from their web page, index them, and build just use our current search interface, you can see the metadata we crawled from that page can be displayed nicely on the as shown in the right of this page. So that's the context we for this working group, because there are so many communities doing this on their own. We think it would be good to bring together communities to work together on these vocabularies to describe and document the research data, but not only research data, and also related resources such as software and data services and more. And through these exercises, we can identify and bridge gaps in existing schemas. And we also trying to produce guidelines for those communities whose needs are not addressed by existing metadata schema, not just the schema.org, but other schemas as well, and provide guidelines if extension needed from the schema.org for a particular community. So we started this working group from at P13 with a BOF session, then at the plenary 14, the formal start of this working group. This is our third plenary or second plenary as a working group. And hopefully we could have a draft guideline or recommendations by next plenary. As a working group, we have a deadline. So by plenary 17, we expect to have a recommendation output, ideally with adoption use cases. So we have 4 chairs for this working group and a number of people sitting on the technical advisory board. We hope we could present a variety of communities and different standards. We have a monthly call on the second Thursday at PM UTC or GMT. So if you want to participate, involved in the workplace, join the group, you will get notification. Okay, next we start the use case presentation. We will have 2 use cases. One is from about IGSN, and second one is a software. So I hand over to you, Doug.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen here. And just share my desktop. And over here, and you can get into present mode. All right, how's that look, Mingfang? Look good?
Beautiful.
All right, so thank you very much. So thanks for the opportunity to talk here. And I think Mingfang has done a really fantastic job of laying kind of the foundation of structured data on the web, which is kind of the main topic, right, of this working group. And also kind of the primary use case that we're probably most familiar with, which is this concept of data sets, right? What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about another use case. And first I should give a shout out to Jens Klump, who is the primary person who put together these slides, and also to Jess Robertson. So
Doug,
Jens, yes?
Doug, if you are thinking we're looking at slides, we're not. We're looking at a beautiful picture of an island in an ocean.
Oh, no, you should not be seeing that. Maybe that's where you'd like to be, but.
Sorry, I thought you would show that.
No. Let's see, let's try and get this to that.
It's the background of the new Mac OS Catalina.
It is, and it's also asking me to allow it. To record my screen, and it's preventing it from doing that until I restart, it says. So let me stop that one. Let me try, let me do this one.
Yep.
That works?
We see the slides, not as beautiful though.
All right. So, well,
okay.
My apologies for teasing you with Catalina Island. But, and so, so let me just, I'll jump in here real quick and again, the shout out to Jens and Jess for helping me put this together. What we want to talk a little bit about is IGSN, which is the Global Sample Number Identifier, right? And so where we've seen an example of utilizing structured data on the web, schema.org for describing data sets, what we're talking about is now looking at samples. So IGSNs are a persistent identifier for physical samples. It's a way to provide a unique identifier for these samples in the same way that ORCID might be used for people, DOIs for publications, or for data sets or things like that. So it's a persistent identifier for physical samples backed by the handle system and provides, as Jens said in the earlier talk, a way to anchor knowledge graphs in physical reality, right? So it's a way to connect them into the world of physical samples. And so, as you can imagine, physical samples are very important in the scientific context. There are many physical samples, and some of them are ephemeral, right? Or they may be destroyed during the process of analyzing them. And the numbers are likely to be very, very large as we think about samples and subsamples of those and the types of things that are taking place in that environment. So we had this challenge of we wanted to be able to take advantage of some of the things that you see in schema.org type data set landing pages, where you have a object that you're describing with metadata behind it. And we also wanted to take advantage of the scaling that we might be able to get out there. There's also a challenge of variety. As you can imagine, in samples, you might have samples that are for geosciences, archaeology, material sciences, all sorts of things. And so additionally, we needed this ability to have a small metadata kernel that could then be extended with profiles that allow us to provide a way for domains or communities of practice to describe additional information that's associated with them. So one of the things that's taking place within the IGSN right now and within this IGSN 2040 project is looking at the fundamental architecture that we want to use to move forward with. And part of that is really looking at and focusing on the adoption of structured data on the web to achieve that, leveraging the web architecture to provide a high degree of scale, but also, and Ming-Fang alluded to this in the introduction, taking advantage of the rich tooling and the experience that exists within the developer community, within the tooling community around JSON, right? Because many of those tools and many of those experiences that fit for JSON help us in the JSON LD world as well. Additionally, we've been working on specific tooling for the structured data on the web around the geosciences. And so under the EarthCube program, we've been able to work on some software to experiment with harvesting and indexing this material. So we take the sitemaps, as Ming-Fang said, index them and generate indexes and interfaces to those indexes. So very analogous to the example that she showed that has been taking place down in Australia as well. There's also a lot of work taking place within the community around authoring guidance. Under the ESIP Federation, there's the Science on Schema work that's taking place, particularly focused on the geosciences and type data set in terms of how we can provide guidance to the publishers on how to expose their information for harvesting, not only to address the needs of a large commercial indexer like Google, but also to address then the more focused needs of maybe a domain indexer, right? Because one of the goals really is to provide this kind of democratization of indexing. Similar work is also taking place in the bio community under the bioschemas.org, and I'm sure there's other guidance work that's taking place in other areas as well, in other domains of practice. We really view this then as a gateway to semantics and knowledge graphs, right? Because the fundamental model underneath JSON LD is, of course, RDF, and we're representing our information in that manner. And that allows us to take advantage of many of the semantic tooling and the development taking place in the semantics and knowledge graph area to connect into and to provide that kind of rich interconnection in a linked open data approach. And also, in addition to that tooling, then we have the ability to do extraction and validation of these things. So things like shape constraints and stuff like that allow a community or to a provider to say, these are the types of things that I want my metadata to be compliant with. Therefore, I want to check against that, but ignore other elements of it. So many of these were some of the things that for IGSN were something that were of value to us in terms of a reason or a driver for engaging in this direction. A few just more quick examples of this then is that, as mentioned, there's a capacity to validate and extract elements from a JSON LD data graph, right? So these are things like shackle shapes or JSON LD framing. Regardless of what the terms are, really what it allows us to do is to take the information that's being exposed by a provider and selectively pull out elements of it that may be most interesting to our particular use case, to our particular need. Perhaps we simply want to extract out spatial data, for example, to provide plotting. Perhaps we simply want to extract textual information like names and descriptions and keywords to put into an Elasticsearch type indexing system. Or we may have other needs as listed here, like we want to provide material for machine learning environments or for cataloging or other types of things. Really, I think one of the things that's really nice from my point of view on this, though, is this kind of whole kit that we get, right? We get this kind of gateway to semantics. We get this rich tooling and developer experience. We get this ability to interconnect with other knowledge graphs that are under development and under funding currently. So really kind of some of the driving elements of why we're going in this particular direction. So just a couple more slides here. Just to give you an idea of kind of what's going on then is that within the IGSN, what we want to do is provide this ability for the maintainers of physical samples to be able to describe those physical samples, to expose that information in a web architectural manner, and provide then for a large number of aggregators to potentially harvest that information and provide value add type services, whether those be searching, whether they be cross-linking, discovery, whatever they tend to be. And so there's this process then of registration, of agents who provide these types of capacities for that, and then for the metadata aggregators who can then harvest the information that the researchers and the publishers are providing related to physical samples in that environment. So another graphic that Jens put up this morning, I think it's a really nice one, is that many of the things that drive us in terms of structured data on the web are around fair data practices, right? We feel like these are mechanisms that we can use to address fair data. And in some ways we can look at this and say, well, what about fair samples, right? Could we use some of the similar approaches then to make samples fair? And there was, of course, this contrast with the fact that fair data doesn't mean open data, right? Fair data can be closed or have access controls and things like that, but we also do want to try and make the data as open as possible, especially to facilitate reuse and workflow environments and things like that. So, but you know, a very nice opportunity to apply the fair data practices to the physical sample world as well. So just in conclusion, I just want to say thank you. There's a large number of people who are behind the work that's taking place in the IGSN and the IGSN 2040 project. And so I just wanted to give a nice shout out to the people who are doing that. And there are some links for further information if you want. So thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Next one is Martin.
Thank you. Ming-Fang, can you hear me okay or not so much?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, so I will try to share the right thing on my computer. I will be talking about Code Meta, which is a metadata activity about metadata for software. I work at DataSite, but this activity is part of one of my roles, which is a co-chair of the FORCE 11 Software Citation Implementation Working Group, where we have started a task force to work specifically on Code Meta. Software is, of course, also part of RDA. There's a software source code interest group and another working group. And we are basically trying to address very similar problems to what you heard from previous presenters. Oops, sorry. So the starting point is always there is many metadata standards, many sort of silos that maybe sort of work together, but not really. And in software, you have both metadata that are quite specific. So on the left side, you see, for example, package management from particular programming languages, but there's also generic metadata like Wikidata, Core, DataSite, etc., which is sort of very much overlapping with metadata for data sets you heard before. But basically, it's a mess, and that makes it really hard to exchange information and to sort of build tools that do the kind of things that are not fundamentally different from what you heard before. Code Meta started out as a grant-funded project funded by the National Science Foundation in the US, a 12-month eager grant, so just enough to get started, have a workshop, do some writing of the outputs. And there were, even in a short time, there were sort of three important outputs. The first one was work on crosswalks, and I think we will get back to that later in this call about doing crosswalks for data sets. And there is sort of a nice list of crosswalks for example, for metadata used for package managers for Python and R. The second step, and there's sort of an XKCD comic that most of you know about metadata. When you sort of, to solve the metadata mess, of course, you create a new metadata standard. And of course, Code Meta didn't stop with crosswalking, but then it sort of synthesized or sort of all the information that was sort of common to the different standards and created a new one, sort of Code Meta metadata. And they were described in JSON-LD. And I will get back to this more specifically. It's very close to schema.org. And then, as important as sort of the sort of technical developments is that Code Meta has built a community. So the various people who care about metadata for scientific software, whether it's initiatives, organizations, and I've listed a few working groups. They all have sort of, without really much discussion, and that was basically, I think, was, for example, in the first session of the RDA Software Source Code Interest Group in Montreal, it was basically a discussion that took 5 minutes, that everybody likes Code Meta because it sort of synthesizes the metadata that are commonly asked for. Outside of this rather small community, Code Meta hasn't seen much adoption. So for example, a few months ago, when in a hackathon, we searched GitHub for repositories using CodeMeta, we just came up with a few hundred. So it's definitely not widely adopted. And the most important reason is probably lack of tooling. And it's still too hard to generate these metadata files, which is again a topic which is similar to the challenge with metadata for data sets. And now, oops, yeah, sorry, I was problems advancing my slides. So schema.org is actually very close to CodeMeta. And that is mainly because of the initial version, actually, all the metadata that existed in schema.org were just taken for CodeMeta, which is the majority. And what is left is 10 terms not defined in schema.org. So it was a short project. Probably the main reason that they were defined in sort of extension to schema.org in this JSON LD context file for CodeMeta. So what we set out in the Course 11 working group is in the fall last year, we started a new task force on CodeMeta where the basic work is describing all code metadata in schema.org, so describing the 10 remaining terms in schema.org, which we are sort of in the middle of, and it's sort of, there's no really big hurdles. Actually, 2 of them have since been added to schema.org, so that work is done. And the biggest hurdle, if it is any, is convincing the schema.org community that they should include these additional properties. And that is something that, oh, there's a typo. So we hope to wrap this up in the coming months. So at some point in 2020. Because I also attended the session earlier today. There's just 2 little things I want to highlight what might be different from metadata for data sets. One is that right now, in metadata for software, there isn't really a concept of discipline-specific metadata, but sort of all the things we're talking about that people want to describe in software, they're quite generic, which makes it a very good fit for schema.org, and there's no need to do sort of build extensions. Maybe we come to this point in the future, but for now, that's not part of the work to sort of extend this and do this in a sort of generic way. And the other aspect that is a small consideration is that schema.org is typically embedded into web pages, and that's sort of how it started and how web crawlers find the metadata, but that's not really possible in some important places where source code can be found, so most notably code repositories like GitHub, so that we have to be more flexible in how this information is provided, which is sort of files instead of embedding. And with that, I give back to Ming-Fang, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Your use cases yeah, indicated we probably could learn something from you about the extensions. That's also part of our guideline. Doug, there is a question for you in the chat. Could you please answer that question by typing in chat while we're moving along? So our next agenda is a report of progress on crosswork. And Karen, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that. Maybe.
If not, I can share you, move along slides for you. It's up to you.
Why don't you do that, Ming-Fang, and
Okay.
I'll speak to it. And I just wanted to turn on the video and say hi, but I will save the bandwidth.
And I will find the right slides and share.
So the slides are, oops, there. I put it in the chat window.
Yeah.
And I think we're skipping over Layla's section, so you're going down to so slide number 38 in the deck. So my name is Karen Payne, and I am representing the World Data System, a branch of the International Science Council. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about building on some of the earlier work that was done in this working group to look at maybe visualizing some of the crosswalks between common metadata schemes and schema.org. There was, you can go to the next slide, Minfeng. There was a survey that was conducted by this working group to gather information on existing implementations of schema.org into research metadata. And there was a set of crosswalks created that the hope was that it would inform people going forward how to implement schema.org, or how other communities have used schema.org. So you can actually see, go ahead, the next slide, Minfeng. This is the collection. It's just a spreadsheet collection of the schema.org terms, and then 13 different metadata schemas. There are terms that they crosswalk to. So I wanted to see if we could turn that into something that may be useful, and I created a set of visualizations on this GitHub page, which I've put in the chat window. Essentially, there's 3 tools here, and my hope in presenting these to you today is that you can tell me whether or not these are useful, and if we need to continue to put more energy into it, or if there's other things that you would like to see. But essentially, it's 3 different tools. The first one is, go ahead and find next slide, is just a filter of the existing crosswalks. So you can choose a metadata standard, and then it'll just return the schema.org equivalent. So rather than looking at all 13 metadata standards at once, you can choose one to look at. The second tool is an open search. So you can pop in any free text, and it'll search both the metadata terms and the schema.org terms. So if the word turns up, or any branch of that word turns up in either of those, it'll return all instances in which the word was used. So you can share the results from that search in the second slide. Yeah. So you can see if you've got a word in mind and you just want to see where it might show up, that's where that happens. And then the third tool, which I think is actually probably the most interesting one, is I wanted to look at, I wanted to try to use the table to build consensus. So is there any consensus on how different metadata standards are using different schema.org standards? So in this case, you can choose a schema.org property or term, and go ahead and show. It's just a drop-down menu of all the terms, and then it'll return number of times that term is used in different metadata standards. So the word name is quite often utilized as a title. And one of the things that the Sankey diagram tends to show is some of the problems with the source data. So we have questions, for example, about whether or not lowercase or capital case words are an issue. So title with a capital T versus title with a small t. Is that the same term, and can we collapse those into one instance? It also shows it can break, the Sankey can break in the case where, I was generally looking for a simple use case of a one-to-one mapping. But for example, with the RIF-CS metadata schema, there's multiple crosswalks within a single term within a flat file. It's just not the best way to present that. So so it's not perfect, but it is, I think, a good starting place if you have a metadata standard that's used in your community quite often, and you want to see how it might be used. I think this could be useful for that. One of the things I also want to ask the group about is there other visualizations that maybe you would like to see. So for example, we could count the number of times a schema.org property is not mapped to a corresponding metadata terms. In other words, unused or rarely used schema.org properties. And so in this particular tree diagram, it shows the upper left shows the term subject of within the class thing was never crosswalked and never used in any of the 13 metadata standards. But the schema term, for example, author, was used 6 times, but was not used 7 times. So identifying gaps could be another way we could go forward. We could also, next slide, we could also look at gaps in the number of terms in the metadata standard that did not have a schema.org property. So here in this visualization, the bigger box means there are less schema.org terms crosswalked into that standard. So either schema.org is not useful there, or it hasn't been examined or used to its fullest capacity. So, you know, those may or may not be helpful for going forward, but these are the questions that and you can either add these into the collective notes anywhere you like, into the chat window, or email me, but I do see this as something that could be used for building consensus when mapping new metadata schemas to schema.org. It could help going forward if a bunch of communities were able to come to consensus, then it could help with aggregators to check consistency when using schema.org across domains. It could help identify gaps and commonalities. I mean, one of the things that Martin was just talking about was the 10 terms that were not described in schema.org, and he got them described there. So we could be able to use this to help to identify those instances where we need to do some work with schema.org. But you know, mostly I'd like to know, is it a useful product? Does it help you meet any of the planned outputs? And you're not going to hurt my feelings if it's not useful. don't feel like you have to say it is. If it is useful though, and it warrants an investment, then we should probably talk about a proper crosswalk database, you know, version and maintained in of itself. Is that a service that you would like to see my office supply? Although I wouldn't do it. You know, this sounds to me like it should be a community effort to help us identify the proper uses of these terms. Should it be bundled into some other tool? Is there a tooling that it could be used to extend? And you know, are there other visualizations that could be more helpful? So I'd appreciate any honest feedback that you've got about this. And with that, I think that's the end of my slides.
Great, thank you, Karen. And that's end of our all presentations. Now is 50. In next 20 or 25 minutes, we will break up into groups and discuss the 5 questions on these slides. So get your input. What guidelines should be included? If you haven't implemented markup but about to, what kind of things you want to know? And if you have implemented those markup, and what are things you want other people to know? And any feedback about collecting, collating, and analyzing crosswalk, and also any suggestions about collecting, sharing, and collaborative toolings. So let me stop sharing so I can see more of the control panel. So we have 27 people on the call now. So we split up in 5 groups. Is that too many, or 4 groups? probably we have 4 groups. Then I about to send you to breakout rooms. So it may get a few seconds delay, you get the message. When you get the message, you should be able to join one of those breakout rooms. And during the discussion, we have notes for each breakout room. So please type your comment to each questions in the collaborative notes. Thank you.
Ming-Fang, when are we expected to go back? Because
right.
the communication to breakout rooms is not so tricky, at least for me it's new.
Yes, now we come back at 15 past. So at 10 past, I was broadcast the message for you to wrap up, something like that. So we come back to main rooms at 15 past. Then please designate a person from each group to report back. Are there any more questions? Okay. Here you go. Hi, this is breakout room 3.
Yep, I was just checking which one we are.
3.
Okay, so is that your repository or catalog has already implemented markup? Name 3 things or lessons you have learned from your implementation that are important for others to consider. Is that the one?
So no, we are in room 3. Each room will go to the 5 questions.
Okay.
I just put participants
got it. I got it
here.
Okay.
Would it help to share that slide with the questions? I can do that for example.
Okay, if let me type in chat. So Martin, if you're following the collaborative notes, all questions are there.
Okay. Not just because of
Yeah.
And of course, I've practiced in the call 12 hours ago, or whatever it was.
That was the first time I experienced that, and now is the second time. Nick, would you need the? Oh, Nick left. Oh, Nick is still here. Nick, would you lead the? Yeah.
Oh, you want me to lead this? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'll turn my video on then. I don't even know why I had my hood on actually. Anyway, right. So I will just make notes directly in the document, I guess.
Yeah, so everyone can type in.
Yeah. Oops, what happened there? Right. Right. So how long have we got? Half an hour?
Until 15. So we have, yeah.
15 minutes. 15
Yeah.
minutes, okay. All right then. Right, the first question is, your repository or catalog is about to implement markup. Please name 3 things you would like to know. Any takers? I would say
So
is this technically or documentation or guidance?
anything.
Anything. Okay.
Maybe could you please elaborate on what do you mean exactly by markup in this case?
That shown in my early slides. So you embed the schema.org vocabularies into your metadata landing page.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can try to give one answer.
Yeah, we are embedding vocabularies, but we don't use schema.org.
Okay.
So I'm past the stage where I want to implement this, but something I observed, and I did a little sort of analysis and put this in Zenodo 2 years ago, sort of when this was still early adopters, that there was a wide variety of metadata properties that people picked. So I think there was no clear guidance from all the things, what is sort of super required, what is nice, etc. And there were some interesting holds like persistent identifiers, even if they existed, they were not in schema.org or and so I think that sort of documentation of these other things sort of that you should start with as implement, because they're really important for discovery, etc., for fairness or whatever. People, why they do this is might be helpful, because otherwise there's sort of a million things you can implement.
So yours is answer the third question. So what lessons you would other do? So the first question is they haven't implemented. So second and third, you have implemented and now looking.
That's true, but I cannot rewind back and think about, but that's, I mean, yeah, maybe there's other people on call that have implemented schema.org yet and can answer that better.
Yes,
So, go on.
Yes, if I can add, Irena here from Slovenia. I'm a member of CESDA organization also, which is a consortium of European data archives. But we were planning inside CESDA and locally in our archives with different schemas. So we are kind of did something, but probably will need to improve some things. But one of the things that we noticed locally is when we were linking these to Google data sets and others, is that you have these data sets that are, let's say, historical data sets and have different licenses than CC or something else there. And when you're try to embed this in some larger schemas, it's a lot of you need to actually put things in new perspective. So I think this will be an issue in the back. So one thing is when you want to implement what you have, so putting it in a standard and marking it with DataCite or something else. But another thing is improving the metadata that needs to have controlled vocabularies, so to say, or linkages, so it could be harvested by yeah.
Irina, are you talking still about licenses or more generally about controlled vocabularies now?
Yeah, I think both.
Okay.
So both we saw. So licenses is really problematic for historical data, that you have different licenses that is now offered by, let's say, Harvester. But one of the things that we did inside CESDA is that we used DDI controlled vocabularies, and they were translated in most European languages, so it could be used then for catalog search that we have in CESDA. Yeah.
Okay, I've added some notes around your points there.
Yeah, thanks.
Under 3. So if you want to modify those, please feel free. Martin, to capture your issue, your lesson that you learned around markup.
Yeah, should I try to?
I didn't write it. I kind of missed a little bit of it.
I can add that. No
Great.
problem.
Okay, so going back to the first question, we've got now 4 points. All right, actually, so I think it's okay to have the same point in different places, right, Mingfang? So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
historical data set there as well. You've got.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry,
That's fine.
whatever you want it to be. Yeah.
Okay.
As long as we note down things.
Yeah. So we've got documentation guidance. How does schema.org guarantee sustainability? There's a certain risk depending on schema.org. Who put this one?
Sorry.
I had to change my window and unmute first. That was me,
Okay.
Rainer.
Okay. Let me spell your name right. Oops.
Oh, I put it in. I put it in.
Oh, you put it in.
Fine.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if schema.org actually does guarantee anything, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It depends on the business model.
Yeah.
And for long-term research data, there is a certain risk depending on a business model which you can't control, which is not open.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you elaborate, Rainer, because the sort of metadata schema, there's sort of different aspects to this, but the metadata will not go away. It's really who maintains and governs that. But is that different from other metadata standards? That you think there's a higher risk with schema.org, or?
I guess it's the same across the board for these kinds of things, really. I don't think it's any different from the others. But I get the point. I mean, schema.org, they could suddenly remove a particular type if they wanted to. I don't think they do, right? I think they did make some changes to one of their medical branches, right? Or am I right? Or am I misremembering? Layla's not here. Layla would know. Anyway. Okay.
The bioschemas, this is John Grabeel, the bioschemas group created a whole profile for schemas.org all around bioschema vocabularies. And so that's a part of the extended group of schema.org vocabularies, yes.
Okay. We've got Irina's point about historical data sets with different licenses. Rob, self-validation of markup using programmatic tools. So Rob, is this asking where those tools are?
Yes, and the use of. So I do understand that P419 has been developing tools that were supposed to help users be able to validate what they're actually encoding in markup. But this was something that was really not available at the outset. when they were trying to get people to jump on board. So I think new users are still going to be confused about that.
Yeah. Okay. Sarala's asked the perennial question: how is the metadata used for indexing and weighting for ranking by search engines? I don't think we'll ever know. Okay, so the next.
Well, actually, I listened to a recording by Natasha Loy. That was actually organized by DataSide, or yeah, and she said they not do particular ranking around those structure, making use of the structure. So probably it's like any ranking is very much like other web searches. For example, they don't rank terms in title higher than in other fields.
Right.
If I remember this webinar correctly, there was also something about it's a black box and it changes all the time, and also it's not her group that's doing that, but it's sort of Google search in general that's doing some of this. So
yeah. I remember being at talks where Dan spoke about it and spoke about schema.org and was always asked this question, and he said he didn't really want to get into it and that we shouldn't worry about it. So that's all I remember about it, really. Okay, next question. Your repository, your catalog has already implemented markup. Name 3 things you wish you would have known before your implementation. Is that different from the first question? Is about to implement, has already implemented, okay. As above, how to enter various fields. All right, okay, whether mandated or the common practice. Okay, so that's about, you know, mandatory, optional, recommended, right? How much of the guidance is fixed or still changing? How much maintenance is that going to take? Do we need to record who wrote this? I guess, oh crap, I'm on the wrong page. Oops.
Yeah, I was very confused.
I started typing in somebody else's, oh no. I tell you, the problem is that people are typing above me so that my page is scrolling. So if I switch screens and then come back, I'm no longer on the same page. All right. Okay, suitability of markup for different domains, sciences, schema.org proved suitable early on for fixed data products, but was unsuitable for large continuous time series.
We have 5 minutes to go.
I think we've got enough. Actually, we need to focus on question 4 and 5.
Okay, I moved to, it looks like I broadcast a message, say 5 minutes to go. I didn't see that. I moved to other room to let them know.
Okay.
That's that level of attention.
Okay. 5 minutes to go.
We saw the message.
Oh, you saw? Okay,
yeah,
that's good, because I was in one room, I didn't see the message I sent, so I'm moving room to rooms. So I can stay in this room now if you received.
You're always welcome in our room. We were just kind of getting feedback in the last 5 minutes on any of the questions that people might want to share on.
Okay.
That's a good point about collections, though. We should mention that.
Yeah, I wonder, generalizing that a bit further, I wonder if there's some sort of gap analysis that could be done on, you know, what features required by different communities are really sort of not present or not obvious in schema.org.
Right.
The collection part of it, I think, is a good one. So that applies a lot to biodiversity type resources as well.
Okay, I've just added that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
For the crosswalks and the toolings, do we have anything there for suggestions?
Yeah. There's just been, the tooling area is an area that I'm working in. I know the bioschemas community is working in that. I think it'd be really, really worthwhile for me, at least, to have an opportunity, and I think we talked about it in the first one, to share some of the tooling work that's going on so we can see what people are working on, where there's opportunities for collaboration, things like that. So, it'd be nice to be able to expose some of this tooling, even in its early stage, to people who understand that it's in its early stage, to kind of get feedback on its utility in various workflows.
Coming back to just a question about your IGSN progress that you were talking about. Because in there, like, they have the notion of collection and also of subsamples and things like that.
Right.
So when you're doing that, you were looking at the level of the sample, I'm guessing, right?
Right.
But the collection concept would have appeal there too.
Right, and it would. And we have talked about that as well, is that, we have the concept of samples and subsamples, and then we also have the concept of a collection of samples in the context that this is just an arbitrary kind of like virtual collection of samples, but not in the real, concept of collection from like a museum or things like that.
Yeah.
But it definitely will come up, obviously. And at some point, we'll get teleported back to plenary. So.
I just wonder if there's a role for the RDA in helping advertise availability of tools or activity that's going on.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the link. We're trying to gather the toolings, a catalog of those toolings. Where's the link? At the moment, where is the link? I will type the link into the chat, into the notes.
Yeah, that's excellent. Because there's a couple other groups like ESIP and so forth that are collating similarly, and it'd be good to have a cross pollination, if you like, of the different.
Very much so.
This.
And which room? We are in room 1.
Yeah.
Room 1.
Yep, we're room 1.
Room 1. Okay.
How do we go back?
I will close. Let me insert the link and close the room. It's 15 past now. Let me to the last questions. Okay. So here it's just a couple. So now we haven't broadly advertised that, but that's kind of idea, collecting toolings and to share with the group. And Doug, if you could add your tools to there, that would be good.
Sounds
okay,
good.
I'm about to close the room. Okay. Back to the main room.
Or how we will add as another controlled vocabularies in the.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself. Go.
Good, welcome back. We had a good discussions. People are still coming, so I'll wait. Okay, welcome back. We seem had a good discussion. Now is reporting back time. So room 1. who is reporting back?
I can do it. we didn't decide. Okay, and so reporting group one, breakout group one, we mainly talked about the first point about your repository catalog is about to implement markup. Name 3 things you would like to know. So we said, okay, well, we want to make sure there's a well-adopted existing crosswalk. We wanted to have the opportunity to look at some examples to kind of see how that crosswalk is working. So we're not sure if there's an existing place where some examples are already being listed. We wanted to better understand the process of registering your data sets so that they'll get indexed by the Google crawler, and if there's appropriate or better points of contacts within Google, but likely not. There's also wondering if there's a webinar or slide deck to show step-by-step instructions on how to implement the markup. And then we also talked about, is there any movement or progress towards seeking out a dataset collection concept within the schema.org types, in addition to the dataset in the catalog that's already there. And then we didn't really have an experience already implementing it, so we had to leave out those questions, but then we went into tools, and there's a link here. Doug, I don't know what that is, so if you want to mention that. But I think the work that Karen showed is really helpful to have those crosswalks and to know as a starting point. So I think that's been a really useful effort.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to add something from breakout group one?
Thank you. We move to room 2.
So that was us, and similar to a lot of what Raina was saying, it would be good to have some specific guidance on how to implement and validators for particular communities if they exist. Any recommendation on required or recommended fields and workflows or tools that are compatible with existing platforms. So examples of how that could actually work. There was if they've already implemented markup, you should know that you're an early adopter, so this is likely going to change at some point. And then where to place particular information within particular profiles. So again, what is the community? How has the community been implemented in the past? For recommended uses of schema.org are unstable. And the Google governance is complicated, and Martin spoke to that in his talk. And so my understanding is right now Google is just deciding to watch communities of practice and see what they like, and they'll adopt what the community, if there's a large following for any particular community. So I do think that the way forward with this is to work within communities of practice for domains, the way that bioschemas.org did and ESIP did. There was an interesting discussion about collecting and analyzing crosswalks that that the spreadsheet was a good starting point, but we needed something that was a little more, could represent more complicated relationships, whether one-to-many relationships or mapping of terms which were similar but not exactly equivalent. And somebody recommended Airtable, which I was not familiar with, so that was interesting. And the collections of examples from different repositories that implemented the crosswalks. And in the chat earlier, Nick had asked me about did we use the variable types? In other words, did we match strings to strings or date fields to date fields? I do know that we captured the variable types or the term types, but I don't know if that was used in the crosswalk at all. So that's something I can circle back to. that it should all be in a common place, which would be good in an open source setting. There's a recommendation that if there is a tooling that's created that actually has some functionality, so beyond the visualization, if we actually found a tool that added markup to existing metadata, that it would be useful to have it be part of a larger open source project like Apache, rather than a sort of a one-off 2-year project that may not be maintained going forward. And that should live in a home with the crosswalk data that allowed for maintenance of the standards as they go forward. Yeah, I think that's about it, unless anyone else in my group wants to add anything or correct me.
Okay, considering time, we may better move to room 3. Thank you, Karen. And room 3?
Yeah, I guess that's me. First of all, I want to apologize to room 2, because I think at some point I started writing notes in your page accidentally. So sorry about that. All right, so first question, name three things you'd like to do know when you're about to implement markup. We have suggestions like documentation and guidance, which has been mentioned already, I think. I think group room 1 mentioned about webinars. There's a question about how sustainable schema.org is itself as an effort. I think we decided that was a general concern for all things, but presumably it's quite stable. Irina brought up an issue that she had with historical data sets around licenses. There's some points raised about validation tools and where they are, and if this kind of information is being collected, for example, on GitHub somewhere. I think Rob pointed out that there were some collections of such tools from previous plenaries. So wondering if there's anything around validation tools for that. For having already implemented markup, things that people wish they'd known in advance was suitability of markup for different domains, and the need for sitemaps to kind of locate the pages in the first place. Some lessons learned. Martin pointed out some of his learnings, basic guidance on properties. Again, there was the issue raised around licenses, controlled vocabularies, and provenance for analysis of assets. For the crosswalks and collating that information, Irina pointed out that we wanted to have that made as public as possible. Karen's already mentioned my question about property values, and Martin said that for this kind of work, we need kind of machine-assisted capability to do that, to make it more scalable. Otherwise, it's not really going to be sustainable. And yeah, for the last point, we talked about GitHub, and John's put a note about schema.org creation pipeline at Stanford. I maybe missed that, or you added it afterwards, John. Do you want to say anything about it?
No, I've linked to it. It's been brought at other meetings.
Okay, all right, and that's room 3. Thanks.
And thank you, Nick. Room 4.
So we were room 4. We more or less work through the whole set of questions. We were a group of 6. Not many have done markup already with these sort of schemas, but had some experience from others, from themselves, with other type of semantic data as well. So for the first question, there were some things that people would have liked to know related to how to convert a metadata to their own data. What are the things that you need to take into account at a collection data set collection level, and regarding granularity as well. Those, unfortunately, are most likely to be case by case and can differ one from each other. So it's really difficult to create guidelines for those. But there was an answer that was having examples on how others have done it that can be done, and we can target that. And some of best practices to include schema.org at different levels. For the second one, people contributed with cases they had experienced, cases that they were aware of, and situations that they could imagine. So for this one, we have, sorry, but the page just jumped. People would want to know how to do the things in an efficient way and how to make things really compatible. For the third question, one of the things for people using markup, but semantic markup, is that the crawlers do not index RDF, for instance. So that is an advantage of having markup on web pages. But you still need to check the processes. And if you are delivering the data in different formats, you need to make sure that all of them are up to date. Otherwise, you will present in different data depending on the format. Trying to have discipline agnostic metadata as much as possible. Trying to use vocabularies and maybe finding a way for them to lower the complexity on them. Now about suggestions for collating crosswalks. So they would want the crosswalks to be completed, and they would want to see if there is any way to know whether the crosswalk is complete or not. Mostly crosswalks are done by hand, so it's kind of difficult to have any tool that will assess whether it is complete or not. But with the visualization tool that we saw today, then, well, we have at least some tools that will help in there. And also, sorry, but the document keep jumping. And also something about verifying whether the crosswalk or writing them. Usually that at crosswalk level is not that easy, but regarding the markup that someone is implementing according to a schema, then verification in those cases, it's pretty much achievable. And regarding suggestions, just make sure that we are using standards. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have get a lot of good ideas for each group. At the top level, there are demandings about documentation and a webinar. Then hopefully in next 6 months we will draft up the guideline. So we have a monthly call. So probably we will direct those calls and to writing sessions, if you like, and to progress on that. We will discuss how to arrange a webinar to show examples and processes how to publish that. So if you are not this group member, so but you are RDA member, so it's easy to go to RDA website and join the group and get a future notification of the group meeting and activities. And if you are not RDA member, that's very simple. Just go to RDA website and register. It's free. After you register, you can choose any group that's relevant or of interest to you. Okay, sorry we have 2 minutes past, but that's it. Thank you all for your participation. Stay safe and keep well, and we will see each other in our monthly call. We will cancel the call in April. That sits on the Good Friday or evening before Good Friday for you. So we will have the next call in May. See you then. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Ming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting the meeting, Link.
Thank you. It's a long day
Thank
for you people from, especially Doug, from 4 o'clock now to, yeah.
You've been doing both as well. So.
Yeah, I have a bit of sleepy in between. Okay, and see you, and thank
Take
you.
care all. Yep, bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.